Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us. We're welcoming you to the climate negotiation session with GC. I'm Agnes on behalf of YE, Youth and Environment Europe, the largest European network of youth organizations. We have 42 members across Europe, and we're working mainly on advocacy and raising awareness on environmental issues and building capacity. I'm the policy coordinator of YE, and now I'm going to pass the floor to Penny.
Greetings and welcome everyone once more to a masterclass on climate negotiations, the live session hosted by Generation Climate Europe and Youth and Environment Europe together. We wanted to create this session in order to really cast a spotlight on the participation of climate negotiations by youth. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for being here on Saturday afternoon again. And in case you're watching this recording, for taking the time out to hear from all of our speakers. In the session's conception, we were mindful that a young person's experience in international fora is distinct. So for that reason, we gathered a small group of experts in various areas and experiences to speak with you today. On behalf of Generation Climate Europe, I'm very happy to have all of you here and listening. So with that, I would end my introduction and pass the floor back to Agnes.
Thank you, Penny. Now it's time to meet our speakers and have a small introduction from them. So shall we start with Elisa?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. So my name is Alyssa. I'm based in Montreal, Canada, and I work for the International Secretariat for Water. And I'm currently leading the Global Youth Movement for Water towards the 2023 UN Water Decade Conference, which is going to be held in March. It's going to be a huge event, a huge moment. It's the first time in 45 years, it's going to be UN conference on water. And I'm also on the youth advisory panel of the Global Center on Adaptation. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Elisa. So next, I would go to Jan.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you again for the invitation. And yeah, I'm Zan Northcote from the UK. My background's mainly in climate education, teaching young people how to engage in politics at the local level and general educational programs. And then this year, I'm serving as the Global North focal point for Younger, which is the children and youth constituency to the UNFCCC, which is the body which organizes all involvement of youth NGOs, activists, and students in international climate change negotiations. So great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then we would go to Alicia. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it.
No worries, no worries. I'm used to it. Hi, everyone. My name is Elisha. I'm based in New York because I'm currently studying at the New School master's degree in environmental policy and sustainability management. I'm here because it was one of the pre-COP delegates for Luxembourg back in last year, 2021. So from that, that's my direct experience, with the pre-COP and with the COP system and everything. But I also used to be the liaison officer on climate change for Youth and Environment Europe. In that case, I was also following what was going on within the UNFCCC. Besides that, I'm also for half a year, was working for volunteering for the Center for Multilateral Negotiations, which also focused on how to improve negotiations within the UNFCCC process. And on the side of that, also politically active in the sense. So in that area, I have some insights and some kind of experiences talking to policymakers, because policymakers and negotiators, it's comparable experience. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much, Elisa. And last but not least, we are going to Lou.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Lou Collin. I'm originally from France, but I now live in Montreal, in Canada. I've been working with different NGOs over the past few years at the local and international level. I've worked with Youth Environments Europe and Generation Climate Europe on a few projects. And I also attended several international negotiation conferences, like the SB this year that was preparing COP27. And my main NGO now is Care About Climate, that works on the international level on NDCs and climate negotiations.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your introductions. And now that we all know who our speakers are, I think it's time to start the discussion. So first question that I would like to start with is that as everyone has a very active background, what is your experience of getting involved in climate diplomacy, and how, for example, a young person can do that? And this is targeted to all of our speakers. I don't know who would like to start. Raise hand. Okay, Jan?
Sure, I can jump in first if no one else wants to. But yeah, I mean, in terms of climate diplomacy, I think there's many different ways to go about it. For me, I started at the local level. I was working with a previous NGO where I was working, and they specialized in supporting young people to engage with their local level politicians. And it was very eye-opening because, as I really sort of never really knew how it actually works in practice to try and go and, speak and lobby to your local elected officials. But actually in many countries, it's a lot easier than you think to do so. And actually, politicians are very impressed if young people come and speak to them. And if you have detailed proposals ready, they often listen to you. And, I do think they usually will care what young people think. And so, yeah, I always encourage people wherever you live, try to target climate issues from a macro perspective, and getting legislation passed is one of the most effective ways that can happen very, very quickly. So definitely engaging with your own government is extremely important. But if you're interested in getting more involved on the international side as well, I can share a bit about Youngo and how that works, because so essentially back at the Rio Earth Summit nearly 30 years ago now, that's when the world's governments finally came together and recognized climate change as a serious issue that will take international cooperation to agree on. And 3 bodies were created to sort of address that, one of which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. So that's the UN body which now facilitates all the international or intergovernmental climate change negotiations. And for a long time, that was just a purely government-involved process. But from about 15 years ago, they started opening up to some non-governmental engagement in the negotiation processes. And slowly, NGOs engaging in that process started to build sort of coalitions and get into groups. And 9 of these groups became significant enough that they've now actually been recognized as formal, what they call constituencies to the UNFCCC. So these are coalitions of groups representing key stakeholders, such as one for farmers, one for indigenous people, one for business, etc. But one of them is the children and youth constituency, which we know as Youngo colloquially. And yeah, so Youngo is a mechanism that's there for any youth organization or youth person involved in climate change work to come and be involved in the formal negotiations. And actually at the official UNFCCC meetings, like the SB or the COP, being the most renowned one, all governments have a seat in the negotiation sessions, and there's actually a formal seat for these 9 constituencies in the live negotiations as well. And yeah, so actually young people can come to COP if you can get accredited, and you can actually have a real voice at the negotiation table. To get accredited, I mean, younger, you can sign up to our mailing list. We try and help as many people get accredited as you can. Or if you look on the UNFCCC website, there's a list of NGOs which are formally recognized by UNFCCC. Or if you have your own organization, you can try to get that admitted NGO status at UNFCCC as well. And then you can get badges to come and be there in person at the COP. And, we don't just go there to make speeches and, sort of be tokenized. We actually go with extremely detailed policy proposals. We have national summits in each country for people in each country to prepare proposals addressed to their own government. And then that all feeds into our global use statement, which has, last year it had 50,000 contributors, I think, and a very detailed 70-page policy document. And so, yeah, we actually go there and able to join the live sessions and put our proposals forward. And also throughout the whole weeks of COP and other meetings, we'll be arranging bilateral meetings with different countries and key officials to put our youth proposals forward. And so, yeah, I think always it's important to, focus on our climate work on the ground and at home. But I do think it's worth engaging in these international processes as well. Anything that's agreed at these COPs or in the UNFCCC process becomes binding for every country in the world. And so again, I think that's one way we can maybe achieve the urgent international level of action that we need. So yeah, that's one way to get involved. Happy to take any other questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Jan. As I see that we have one raised hand, I would like to say that after this discussion, we will have time for answering questions for the audience. So if you want, you can write it in the chat, and then we can start answering them after this discussion in order not to interrupt the cohesion. I would like to ask Lou, what is your opinion on this question, the first question, and what has Jan said?
Yeah, thank you. I think Jan did an excellent job introducing it. Of course, there is many ways to go about it, from local to international. There are also Conference of Youth, but I think one of the speakers here is from the Conference of Youth, so maybe we could talk about it a bit more. But you have Global Conference of Youth and Local Conference of Youth that are led by the youth that you can attend to, and you have pretty much one in every country now, or you can create your own. And I would say for climate diplomacy in general, it's really important that you know what subject interests you and you target that subject, because climate diplomacy is very broad. So if you're part of an NGO or you want to join an NGO, just think a bit about what subject really interests you and why you want to engage with it. And I would also say that I attended like many UN events, and even at UN events, they remind you how important local action is. So it's very important to focus also on the local level and talk to local authorities, to your municipality. And I also encourage everyone to join Yongo and join an NGO that go to climate negotiation, because it's a great experience to have. And don't be afraid to speak up, because your voice is very important as a young person. We have a lot to say. And I will pass it on to the next person.
Thank you so much, Lou. And now we're going to Eliza.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to maybe jump on what Lou was just mentioning, because it really relates, I think, to what my experience has been. And I think when you're kind of on the outside of all these mechanisms, it could seem a little bit intimidating. I think climate diplomacy is a big word, or two big words, that can be sometimes a little bit intimidating. And sometimes I think even I still wonder how to get into this space. And do I need to have all of these skills and all of this experience for my voice to be useful and for me to deserve to have a seat at this table? And I think Lou just gave like some really concrete examples of how to get involved. And I think it doesn't need to be like, I think every action at every level is important, and we need all of that, and climate diplomacy includes all of that. So I think from a very local level, like getting involved going to see your local politicians and making your voice heard at the local level, or getting involved in any organization that that is doing concrete actions, whether it be at a local, regional, or international level. I think all of those are all valuable ways of getting involved. So, and we need all of those action to be done at all of those levels. So I would definitely say, like, don't be intimidated, don't be scared to take action, because we really need you. And maybe a little bit on what we're doing for the UN 2023 conference. We're trying to mobilize at the regional levels and organize intergenerational dialogues at the regional levels before the conference, because we know that the UN space is hard to it's not everyone that can access it, and not everyone that can be physically present in New York in March. There's so many different barriers to actually access the conference. It's just accessing the conference itself, just getting there, visas, funding, all of that. Obviously, all of those questions are important to address and to find solutions to, and we're trying to do that. And I know that Yongo has done a really amazing job at doing that, making the upcoming COP more accessible as well. But I think having these spaces like we're having today to kind of discuss the important issues in virtual spaces, or having dialogues more at the regional space, such as the COIs for COP, I think those are all really interesting and important ways to get involved in climate diplomacy.
Thank you so much for this. I also agree that we should start from, the lower levels of the local, and then go further and further. I would like also to pass the floor to our last speaker for this question, Elisha.
Thank you so much. I think a lot has been said already as well, and I'm going to build up on what like the speakers before me said, and also just like very directly to something like Jan said. It might sound very daunting if you have like a new NGO and you want to like go for like the accreditation process and everything. But believe me, it's very straightforward. There's a lot of help online. There's like also like you can reach out to Yongo if you have any questions on like the whole kind of procedure. And believe me when I tell you, because I did it for Youth and Environment Europe, and it was very, very straightforward. And we got the accreditation as well. So like that is something that I think is very, very just like interesting to know, that it might seem so big, so daunting. So, oh, hey, I want to become an accredited organization at the UNFCCC, what they have to do, but very straightforward and to the point. And I think also what Elisa said earlier, when it comes to not knowing or not being certain of yourself in the sense of kind of experiences, what you did, and are you even in the right place? Believe me, I think a lot of the people that go to these kind of things have some kind of imposter syndrome in the end, because you will always have someone who has experienced so much, seen so much, just have a different kind of lived experience. And you'll be like, wow, compared to what they did, that what I did is so super small and super insignificant. But then again, it is not insignificant. And I think what always like kind of matters for me is that each and every one of us, we have our own lived experience. And that lived experience is kind of something that we are experts on, right? You are your own expert on that lived experience that you have, which is why local involvement is so important, which is why like just collaborating with others on the local level, on the national level, on the international level is so important. And that's something that you can bring into those spaces when you come into those spaces. Now, there is Yongo, there's NGOs, but then also there's also from the government side, sometimes there are programs that help young people get involved in UN processes. One of these, for instance, is the UN Youth Delegate Program, which is like, in some countries it does exist, in other countries it's still in its baby years, so to say. But what basically can happen through these kind of processes is that you can join, for instance, the UN General Assembly, or also like the UNFCCC negotiations, the COP negotiations, as part of your government's official negotiations. So you would be part of the delegation that your government sends there, and as part of that delegation, you will be the young voice of the young people in your country, telling telling your government what they should include in their, and what they should include and what they should focus on in their negotiations. But you can also be, in a sense, a gate opener for other young people that might be present there with NGOs, and saying, listen, like, you reach out to them, and then you reach out to your delegation and try to set up a meeting. And in that sense, you can give them an ear closer to a party, because at the very end of the day, all the input that is being gathered from all the non-party stakeholders, it's the parties that decide what to put in the declaration. It is them that in the end have also to like kind of decide on implementing those things at the local level. And I think like that is just very important, that there is multiple different ways in which you can interact. There is a lot of expertise, there's a lot of knowledge that goes around and like how you can do those certain things. And it's easier said than done, I guess, but like believe in yourself when it comes to those things, because your knowledge, that what you have lived through, that what you experience, is really valuable and useful and can help make the world a better place. I guess Agnes is gone for a bit. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I'm so sorry for this, but it was an emergency that I just received. I'm so sorry for this. Thank you so much. I'm gonna start with the next question. Now that we have a broad overview of how to get involved in climate diplomacy and what are the opportunities, is that what are the tools and the tips that would you give to young people in participating in this international climate negotiations? Do you have something more concrete to suggest? Yeah, Lou?
Yeah, so I can speak from my experience. So this year I went for the first time to like a UN conferences, so the SB that's preparing COP27. And it feels very scary, and like my colleague said, can seem very imposter syndrome, but you have to remember that first these meetings are supposed to represent you, are supposed to represent the people, so you're as necessary in these spaces as other people. And I would say make a schedule, because there are so many different rooms and conference rooms and things happening at the same time during the day that maybe you would want to attend everything. And I think that's what I did at the beginning. I was trying, like, running back and forth and trying to attend everything in the same day. And it's just not good, because you're not fully in the rooms and you're not attentive enough. So usually you have big screens with all of the rooms and what's happening there and at what time. So I would make a little schedule for myself, or what's important for me, for my NGO to attend. And of course, you have different badges. You have the orange badges if you're an observer as an NGO. You have the pink badges if someone is a negotiator, part of the government. And you have the media badges. So it's kind of important to know what each person is and what they represent. And I would say in negotiation rooms, try to you have little signs that say observers, and means that you're an NGO. And basically, if you want to speak in a negotiation room, you need to have one of these signs. So if you're part of a big NGO like Yongo, usually they have their own sign that just say Yongo, or the name of the NGO. I was a small NGO, so I didn't really know how it worked. And after a couple of days, I figured out that I needed to grab one of these signs that said observers, that are usually at the entrance of the room, to be able to speak. And if possible, sit to a seat that has a mic, because if you want to speak up, usually you need a sign and a mic. And most of this room, I mean, some of them have 2 rows. The first row is negotiators and the second row is observers, but often there are not enough negotiators, so you can sit on the front row. Just careful you're not stealing anyone's seats, but you can. And usually when you're in the front row, it's easier to have a voice and to participate. Just put your sign up, you open the mic and you say what you have to say. always better to have it written down before. But I'm telling you this because it took me like a week to figure it out, and so much lost time, and I was only able to like participate and give a voice at the last day because it was how long it took me to figure out how to do it. So yeah, just grab a sign, open your mic, say what you have to say, and close your mic, and really like, I know I'm saying it a lot, but like speak up, because you're representing so many people actually by speaking, because the youth has really like so much to say, and it can feel, I know it feels really scary to like speak in front of negotiators, but really like speak up your voice. I did it the last day in the Ocean and Climate Change conference, and at the beginning nobody answered, and after the session was closed, like negotiator approached me and we talked about what I said. So maybe you will feel like no one is listening to you, but people are actually listening. So yeah, I will give the floor to my colleagues to speak more about this.
Thank you. That's very inspiring to know that what can come after you participating. So as we need to be during the time frame, I would just ask if we have another speaker to talk about this, and then to share. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. When both of you talked about imposter syndrome, it can be daunting when you first come into this space. But yeah, never doubt. I mean, I can promise you many negotiators for governments go into these spaces with very little knowledge themselves or experience themselves. And actually often young people really, just don't give themselves enough credit. And yeah, so try to be there. And I mean, in general, my main advice is just take it seriously when you go. Particularly the COP, I find it, the most important decisions on climate change shaping the future of the world are happening, but they're surrounded by hundreds of different side events and pavilions and free food and, receptions and all these sort of nice distracting things. And so a lot of young people, I think, not just young people, everyone gets, can get quite distracted by the different sort of cool things happening. I would say if you're going to COP, really take it seriously and go there to negotiate, because as I mentioned, and as Lou was just saying, we actually can join the actual negotiation sessions as young people and can put policy proposals forward. And yeah, some concrete ways to sort of be prepared for that. Again, if you just sign up to Youngo, it's an open constituency. Anyone can just sign up to our mailing list, and then you'll get a huge amount of information to sort of help prepare. We've had really detailed capacity building sessions on each of the thematics, which will be up for negotiation at COP this year in the build-up. And again, you can even sign up now, and we'll share all the recordings of those again on the mailing list. We'll also have a capacity building specifically on the logistics to run through all the technical stuff that Lou is talking about, where you can sit, how all the protocols to observe. And then also we have the Conference of Youth. I see someone's put in the chat. Well, we have local conferences of youth in each country in the months building up to COP. And then the immediate 3 days before, you could apply to go to the Conference of Youth, which is all about, really preparing young people to go and negotiate at the COP immediately following. And then at the COP itself, every day Youngo has, the official youth sort of coordination meeting, and anyone's welcome to come and attend those, and we'll run through what's on the agenda that day. For each thematic, people will talk about key negotiations coming up. So it's a great place to, learn more about the processes, find more people to learn from, to help you sort of get involved. And then, for each sort of major chance to make an intervention at a negotiation, as Youngo, we're not an organization ourselves. It's just an open constituency. So we go there to represent the voice of the youth climate movement globally. So typically what we'll do is we'll get everyone who's interested in joining the negotiation, and they'll jointly together write a set of, an intervention for that session. So anyone's welcome to feed into that. And if you're getting involved with writing the policy, then you'll usually get a chance to speak at one of the negotiations as well. And for the major sort of plenary interventions, we actually share the drafts to our mailing list. So even if you're tuning in, even if you're not at the COP in person, you can actually contribute to those proposals through that way as well. So yeah, there's a few tips, but I'll go back to you.
Thank you so much for your tips. They're very useful, I would say, for young people, especially now that COP is approaching. Next, then I would like to ask, now that we have the tips and we have an image of how it is to be in. Yep, Elisha, I'm sorry.
Just sorry, very quickly, because it fits into like this kind of thing with tips. Usually every day in the mornings, there's also like briefings. And the big NGOs also open up those briefings on like what is the latest standard negotiations, what is the position of this country, what's the position of that country. And if you are able like to join these kind of briefings, it's very useful because you can try to keep the track of everything, but as well, there are people that are keeping track of everything. And it's just very helpful if you then look at what they do and they provide you with that kind of knowledge, because then you can really also like focus on the issues that you are there for. So joining those kind of briefings is also like a tip that I definitely put up there.
Very useful. Thank you for this intervention, Elisha. Now, I would like to ask, what do you think that it's the most important thing to know when entering these spaces on climate negotiations? What we should keep in mind more? Do we have a volunteer from the speakers? Yeah, Lisa?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question. And I think for me, it's been mentioned already, I think, by all of us at this point, but I think that shows how important that is to actually be confident in your message and be confident in yourself and know that you have a place there and you deserve to be there. As Stan said, like, it's always interesting to see all of these people with a lot of experience that not necessarily have that much knowledge that we would think they have about the given subject. Sometimes we underestimate kind of our levels of knowledge and skills on the subject at hand. So I think be confident in your message and what you have to say, because I think that transpires with in every intervention that you have. If you're not confident, that definitely shows. So I think that would be one thing. And I also wanted to speak a little bit on the different outcome documents. So I think every youth conference, every youth gathering now has like an outcome document, policy paper, position paper, however we want to name it. And I think that those are really important for us to, when we go into these spaces, to have common messages, because if we go into these spaces as all individuals, I think our message will not be as strong. And as I mentioned just before, we're representing thousands and millions of young people all over the world. And I think that it's important for us to really have this common message to really get through to those people who are making those decisions. And for that, I just wanted to speak a little bit about the outcome document that we did have for through the Global Center on Adaptation Youth Dialogue that we had a few weeks back, that speaks more specifically on the youth asks for more specific to climate adaptation. And we're really hoping that this could feed into the policy paper, of course, that Yongo is working on, but more broadly into all the interventions and feed into all of the interventions that will be made by youth at COP, but also all over the world in all different setting and dialogues that are going to be happening in parallel to this event as well. So there's the guidelines are published, but the actual document will be published in coming weeks. So we're hoping that it will be soon, but I'll just link that in the chat. And yeah, if ever it can be of any use to all of you when you'll be attending COP and maybe inspire you in your different interventions, know that this has been worked on by hundreds of youth that are really passionate and interested in climate adaptation. And yeah, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Elisa. Does any other speaker has a point of view on the highlight of the things that we should be aware of attending climate negotiations? Yeah, Jan?
Yeah, I think one more major piece of advice is yeah, just to choose what you want to focus on when you're there, because there's a huge amount of different things under negotiation. And yeah, I mean, within Youngo, we have 25, I think, different thematic working groups to focus on all the different topics. And, you know, there's separate negotiation streams for adaptation, mitigation, finance, loss and damage, et cetera, et cetera. And for each session, I mean, it's very complex, these negotiations. To really be able to meaningfully input, you know, you need to have read the kind of background documents and the previous agreements made on that thematic. And yeah, so try and choose somewhere to focus, and usually that will, you know, align with whatever work you're doing locally or with your organization back home. And yeah, if you really sort of focus and come in with some very specific sort of policy targets, I think you're much more likely to be able to get them achieved.
Thank you so much, Jan. Yeah, it's very important to be focused when there's so many things happening at the same time. So I completely agree with that. And, if there aren't any additional, oh yeah, Elisha.
Just on like the focus thing, and I also know like Jan always mentioned it already in like the very beginning, like the importance of being straightforward and right to the point, because the people there, like the negotiators, they are not the politicians. Like the politicians are the ones that like put out the broad guidelines and say, yes, we want climate justice. And because this is good to have because of A, B, and C. But the negotiators that are going to go there are really the ones that are going to look at like the nitty gritty detail of like the texts. And they are the ones that are going to like send back the information to the capitals, and the capitals are going to respond to it. So what is really useful in there is like, if you do get into the room and if you do manage to talk to like different kind of people, is to also like maybe have like your points like in a kind of brief and like hand them over to them right away, because they get so much information. They get talked to by so many different kind of sides, and be that lobbyists, be that NGOs, be that other kind of organizations. And when you have something concrete and when you are straight to the point, it just makes life easier for the both of you, because they don't necessarily need to digest it in any other kind of sense, except for just like going over it, reading it, and say like, oh, okay, this, and that. And that's also like just my experience when like you talk to more higher level up diplomats. They are always like, okay, so what is your suggestion? And like when they're asking you what is your suggestion, you should come up with like a concrete kind of thing, and not necessarily get lost in the moral or the conceptual importance of the issue, because very likely they are already there. Very likely they might also be more ambitious than their government, but they do take the line of their government because they are representing their government. So if you come up with concrete proposals, it's just very, very helpful.
Yes, Jan.
Yeah, I think it was very well said. And just a quick closing thought from me in terms of, yes, you can join the live negotiation sessions, but I mentioned as Youngo, we try and target key stakeholders bilaterally as well. And, you know, absolutely agree with what Elisha said about having a focused proposal. And I just wanted to mention, I think the most effective people to target will be your own government. You know, all sorts of different people at COP, but in terms of who's most likely to listen to you, it's going to be your own country's negotiator. And if you're not able to yourselves, Younger, we're happy to facilitate organizing a bilateral with any lead negotiator from any country. And yeah, and they should be listening to you. In case anyone doesn't know, we actually had quite a landmark achievement at COP26 last year, where we got some articles specifically referencing youth for the first time in the COP cover decision. It's known as the Glasgow Climate Pact. And yeah, if you Google Glasgow Climate Pact and look at Article 64 in particular, we actually managed to get in there that all governments are urged to consult with young people during UNFCCC negotiations, and also to include young people on their delegations. And so we need, we achieved that, but we need to sort of make sure they're fulfilling that pledge as well. And so if your government is refusing to listen, we can actually say, well, you've agreed at COP last year to consult with young people. And Elisha spoke earlier as well about how some countries actually welcome youth into their delegations. And again, yeah, from this article last year, all countries should really be doing that. And so if your country doesn't have a sort of program like that, then that's something that you can actually advocate at COP this year or in the future.
Thank you so much for addressing this. I think it's very important for everyone to know who to approach first and with whom is going to have a more fruitful and substantial discussion, create an impact. So last question that I would like to address to our speakers before going to the Q&A section is that how to engage as a youth participant meaningfully and make your voice heard, taking into consideration what Jan has already mentioned and Elisha. Yes, Lou?
Yeah, so I would say one thing that we haven't talked about too much yet, but that is very important, is also like how to network. So depends at what level you do it. For example, at the local level, with Youth Environment Europe, we had a youth summit where we had a meeting with the mayor of the city we were in. And it was just a very nice interaction, like young people to mayor, and it's something you can organize too. And when you want to network, it's important that you have your information ready. So it's nice to have a contact app or something where you have the information of your NGO, your project. So I was using something called Blink, which is an online contact app with all the information from my NGO, and they just had to take a look at it with their phone, and it was much easier than just talking about it, because they won't remember the name of your website or anything if you talk to someone. So it's good to have something ready for them to look at it. And I would say if it's at the international level, at COP, for example, there are also a lot of side events that have been mentioned before that are usually hosted by NGOs and are a great way to meet other NGOs, especially youth NGOs, and create relationships with them. And it's also much smaller, so much easier to make your voice heard. And I went to a lot of side events and I raised my voice each time, and it sparked a lot of conversation at the end with different NGOs and even negotiators, because you make yourself notice and they want to know more after. And yeah, even in receptions at COP, don't be afraid to speak to a negotiator and approach them. Don't chase them around, obviously, but just human interactions are always a plus. And yeah, I'll pass it on to my colleagues to complete what I just said.
Yes, Elisa?
Yeah, I think that for me, the power of communication is central. I think even if we have all that knowledge and all those stats and all the right arguments, if we're not able to deliver it properly in a convincing way, then it doesn't have that as much impact as it could. So I think really developing those skills on communicating effectively is essential. And I think as well that we underestimate the importance of those, as Lou mentioned, side events are more like the informal conversation in the hallways between the official sessions. Usually that's around a coffee, or usually that's when the like most decisions or a lot of decisions are made, and those human connections are so important for setting the ground for work after the conference as well, because the conference is quite short, it's moments in time, but what happens before and after is as important. So I think really like taking those moments seriously, going and being actively meeting people, introducing yourself, spreading your message. And so I think we need to put, obviously the official sessions are super important, but we also need to realize how important all of those other moments are in between as well.
Thank you so much. Are there any thoughts on that?
I have a very quick tip. If you do go to side events, sometimes you'll have politicians participate in them. Sometimes you'll have negotiators participate in them. And it's often very difficult to get a verbal response for questions that you ask. So for instance, at the pre-COP, when we had the meeting with all the ministers there, and we were asking questions, we didn't really always get the answers that we were hoping for, because they were just talking around everything. What you could also ask, if you're really fed up at a certain point, is that they just raise their hand if they disagree or agree with something that you are saying and something that you are asking, because you're not waiting for them to respond and to get the microphone back, but you're putting them on the spot, so to say. For instance, if they say, okay, who here agrees that youth should be more involved in climate diplomacy, and who here kind of pledges that they will see how they can open up their delegations for young people, please raise your hand. That is something that on the spot people kind of have to do in a way, or not to. And then you can also just take a picture of that moment and be listen, okay, so when we were talking about this is how you reacted, but this is why we think it's important. I mean, this is just a very kind of quick tip where you might be able to get some more direct response, or at least feel the temperature about how a certain kind of speaker feels without them necessarily having to wait for the microphone to speak and to respond.
Thank you so much, Alexa, for this. Yeah, I think it's very important to address these issues. And if there are not any other thoughts on this issue from our speakers, I would like to ask the audience to start the Q&A. And we already have one question, so I'm gonna pass the floor to Kirill.
Kirill, Cyril, Cyril, people call me different, so it's fine. So my name is Cyril Traore, originally from Guinea-Conakry, currently based in Morocco. I'm also a young activist, climate activist, part of Yango. So my question is much more directed to the younger leaders in the panel. So we've been advocating for more than 2 years now, and the issue is that we haven't gotten the attention that we need in our country. So this is the second year on the road that we've been trying to engage with government officials and public government officials, but they haven't. We haven't been successful in getting their attention, and we know that local involvement is something very important, leading to the UN processes. So my question to the younger leaders over here is, how do we? Are there any mechanisms in place to actually help young local activists on the ground to get the attention that they need in order to have LCOIs because ELCOIS is a very important event, and it actually, that's the time for us young people to actually question the policies that are put in place, but also participate in making them. So yes, so that's my questions. I want to know if there are mechanisms that we can use as of now to actually attract our leaders' attention.
Okay, thank you for this question. And we already have Jan that wants to answer this. So I'm going to pass the floor to Jan.
Thanks. So which country are you from, Cyril?
I'm from Guinea-Conakry, and I'm also part of the ARCOI organizing team in Africa.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's difficult. I mean, there isn't anything we can do to sort of force governments as such to listen to us. But yeah, I mentioned in the middle there that, yeah, we did get agreed at COP last year, this Article 64, which says governments should consult with youth ahead of UNFCCC meetings. So we can definitely, we can specifically cite that to them. If you're coming to COP, I would definitely, come to the Younger Morning meetings, and you can flag that you would like to organize a bilateral meeting with your government team. And we can send out an invitation and try to make that happen. They usually say yes. If they say no, it looks very bad on them, and we can actually flag that to the UN Secretariat. So yeah, I would say try and get a meeting at COP, and there you can specifically, put your proposals forward, or say that, we want to talk about setting up a more consistent dialogue with you. If you're not coming to COP, you can try to set up a virtual meeting in advance, maybe. I mean, all the contact emails of the country head of delegations are openly available on the UNFCCC website. So you can email them and I'll ask for a meeting. If you don't get a response, you're welcome to contact myself or my fellow focal point, Liz from Zimbabwe, who I'm sure you know.
I've already done that.
Formal invitation.
I've already sent you guys an email to know if, but Liz has already told us that we could draft an email and send it back to you guys for you to sign, and we'll send it to the government. But we don't have their email, so I'm getting back to you again. If there's any way that we can find official emails, that would be also fine, because the ministries or the departments have the official requests, but because of bureaucracy issues, we generally tend to not have the conferences before going to COP, and which is really bad for us, because there's no way for us to talk with our government officials, know the contents of the different NDCs, and be able to participate in the outcome, in the inputs. So that's a very, very big issue that most young people in West Africa are dealing with. And this is something that I think it is worth addressing. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, yeah, we'll try and follow up on your email, and I'll put in the chat the link to the country contact points.
Thank you very much, Zan. Thank you.
Thank you for this, for initiating the discussion of the Q&A. And then I'm gonna pass the floor to the next question from Amjad.
Yes, thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for the information. A lot of familiar faces. I met Zam back in New York 2 months ago and the Youth for Climate event, Powering Action. Just like a follow-up, I remember we talked about, you and I and Dr. Omnia, we talked about a document for youth attendees, first time attending COP. So any updates on that?
We actually flagged to UNFCCC that it's for young people coming to COP, it's almost impossible to figure out what's going on. It's so confusing, and they've actually put together a really nice looking presentation guide running through sort of all the logistical details. We're just working on finalizing the draft for that, or they are rather, and hopefully we'll be able to share that soon. And again, just keep a lookout on the Youngo mailing list. We'll be having a logistics capacity building session within the next couple of weeks. And we'll make sure to share everyone that guide document as well.
Thank you for clarifying this. I think it's very useful for everyone here. And I think Penny has raised her hand, so let's go to you, Penny.
Hi, so I wanted to raise a question posed by Kelvin from Mozambique, who raised it but could not be here with us in this live session today. And this is quite a loaded one, so I'll address it to any of the speakers who would like to answer. How can you best proceed with engaging in conversations and negotiations with people or countries whose growth is still based on the exploitation of fossil fuels?
Just giving a minute to everyone to think, and then we have Jan. So we will start with you.
So I don't want to take all the questions. If anyone else wants to speak, please go ahead. I do think it's a good question, though. I had a really interesting bilateral meeting with the Saudi Arabia negotiating team last COP, and we came in quite slightly aggressive. They were getting huge backlash at the time for sort of blocking progress of the negotiations. And it's very interesting, though. Their negotiating team is actually the youngest of any country, I think. And they very bluntly said, our entire country's healthcare system, our education, our transport is all paid for by oil. And if we just switch it off, the country collapse, and that's it. So it's just impossible to immediately transition. But I still, the reality is, if we don't cut fossil fuel production, every country is going to be devastated. No one is going to be spared the impacts. And so, even if they can't, cut oil production immediately, I think there's still, they can still start investing in renewables. They can start planning their transition. We can advocate, for them to have a net zero target and to bring it earlier. The reality is, if every country, even for someone like Saudi Arabia, the amount of money they get from their oil sales, they could build enough renewable energy infrastructure to power the whole country very, very quickly if they had the willpower to do so. So, every country in reality at the moment, I would say, could be doing more. And so, I think it's important to empathize with a country that is sort of reliant on fossil fuels. You don't want to come in and say sort of you're evil because you're producing a lot of oil. If that's how the country and the people are surviving, we have to be considerate of that. But at the same time, I do think there's still specific things for stronger climate action that we can advocate.
Great. Let's go to our next speaker, Elisa.
I just wanted to add, doesn't directly answer the question, but I think it's still relevant. I think there's also usually this, we're often bringing economy and environment kind of as competing against each other. It's as if we feel like we need to, or a lot of countries need, like they have to choose one and can't necessarily have both. It's either a strong economy or either we take measures that are positive for our environment. And I think that for me, one really important statistic is the fact that, I'm more involved in the climate adaptation space, but for every dollar that we invest now in adaptation is $10 saved in like 10 or 15 years. So even if we take it only from the economic perspective, and I think that when we're negotiating, we also need to stay true to our messages and our convictions, but also try and adopt the language of the person that we're speaking to, for really to get through to them. And I think that usually or often that's related to the economy, or at least in our country it is. And so I think really showcasing the statistic that, like, even if we're just looking at the economic perspective, investing in adaptation or investing in sustainable renewable energy sources is the economic smart thing to do. And if we don't do that, then it's going to be costing a lot more money for our government to face the impact of climate change in coming years.
Thank you so much, Elisa. Before going to Lou, as Jan has stated in the group chat, if there is any last question targeted to Jan, we can have a minute, or otherwise I would like to thank you very much for your time and energy for joining this discussion, especially during a Saturday afternoon. So yeah, I don't think there are.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, I'll drop my contact details in the chat as well. And hope to see some of you at COP. And yeah, let's have some strong youth action at COP this year. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So now I will pass the floor to Lou as
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just catching on what my colleague says. It's definitely a difficult question, but just talking about economy, if you're interested of seeing alternatives to growth-driven and fossil fuel-driven economies, you can look at ecological economics, donuts economics, circular economy, and that's really kind of alternative economies that are really getting attention in Europe. There are many European forums and conferences about circular economy, ecological economics, and that's something that you can push in your country, in your local authority, and that is actually beneficial to everyone, our well-being and our economy in itself. And for the fossil fuel specific part, I can give you an example. So I was part of diverse campaign for my university that is one of the biggest one in the country, that's called Concordia. And yeah, so we're a bunch of young people that we, like, how it works is that our university, as a very rich university, invest actually a lot in fossil fuel companies. And our whole thing was we wanted them to stop investing in these fossil fuel companies. But like you say, there is a lot of people's jobs and money that depend on it. So our idea was not to ask them to stop investing at all, but to ask them to invest instead in renewable energy and have a new portfolio with other type of investments. And obviously it was met by resistance, and we had to do a lot of raising awareness, of doing workshop and trying to negotiate with our governing body. Eventually, after a few years, they said yes, but for a very small amount. And I think that's something that's important. Don't necessarily settle down. If they say yes, but you don't think it's enough, you're allowed to say no. I think you should do more. And that's what we did. And we won. It took us like 8 years, but we were the first university in Canada to divest from fossil fuels. And it inspired a lot of universities to do it. So I see a question, it's called Concordia University, and you can look at our campaign. And yeah, so even at the local level, it can actually push your countries to do more, because now there are a bunch of universities divesting, and the divesting movement in general is taking a lot of movements. So yeah, just you can start in your community and make sure to apply pressure and maintain pressure. Even after they say yes, make sure that they're actually doing what they say they're going to do.
Thank you so much for this, Lou. And I see that Elisha is also wants to speak about it, so let's go to Elisha.
So I can't really like talk about like a country that is still relying on like fossil fuel kind of production and like the revenue that it gets from that. But what I can talk about being from Luxembourg is being from a country that is dependent on its finance industry and everything. And I think there are like some similarities, and like one that I just really want to highlight is the fact that because there is that comparative advantage to other countries that your country has, a lot of the solutions are just going to focus on like that comparative advantage, right? Because if you're thinking about, oh, okay, what could we do to get XYZ funded? Well, why don't we look at the revenue that we get from oil production? Why don't we look at the tax revenue that we get from like the finance place? And to a certain extent, that just makes us as a country very lazy, and kind of preempts us from looking at any other solutions in a way, right? Because, you know, if we have a problem, we kind of have a quick fix in a sense, because we are leaders for good, for bad in a certain kind of industry, and that is how we solve our problem. So kind of those dependencies from those industries become your hammer to every, wait, what was it? No, the other way around. Yeah, no, like when all you have is a hammer, all the problems you see like are nails. And I think like that is what happens in the end. And I think that's why what Lou also said about like saying like, listen, there are alternatives out there is very, very important. It's like about like also kind of like imagining what a place could look like, how like the policies could be built upon, like what kind of policies could you use and how could you change that kind of funding. And then that connects to like what Jan said, like if that means that in the beginning you will still be relying on the revenue that you get from like the different kind of worse or industries, it's understandable that from one day to the next you can't just shift production. But on the other hand, you also need to realize that in the long run, this is not going to work out. And in the long run, it's like the young people of your country that are going to suffer from like your choices. So shifting, and if you are truly looking out for the good of your country in that sense, you would also need to think, okay, what kind of alternatives are out there, and dare to jump over your shadow and be like, okay, listen, now if we didn't have this comparative advantage, how would we solve our situation? Like, is there anything else that we have that distinguishes us as a country? Is it a particular workforce that just is built upon like speaking multiple languages, being very receptive to people coming in from the outside? Is it a certain kind of education system that just prioritizes certain kind of things? And then try to leverage those into a wholesale kind of transformation of your country. And I understand how this might sound like very, very broad and very, very conceptual, because it is, because you are talking about something that hasn't taken place yet, is very, very uncertain, and people don't like uncertainty. But I think that is what we as young climate activists especially can do. We can like maybe still have the idealism to think of a world that isn't bounded to the realities that people set themselves, in the sense that, oh, this is unrealistic, this is not going to be possible. And I think that just puts us into a certain box, which kind of constrains the options and the policy options that we have to tackle the crises that we have. So for me, being realistic doesn't mean looking at what is there right now, only looking what is there right now, but being realistic is also about, okay, listen, where do we want to go and how are we going to make it possible that we get there? And I think that was also part of like the Talanoa dialogue 3, 4, 5 years ago, for when Fiji basically it was tackling like the climate crisis in the sense of, okay, where are we now? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? And I think that as a framework is just like very helpful when you are maybe in this negotiations, if you really have like concrete kind of policy proposals of like, listen, this is how we can shift. I think I talked enough about that. Sorry for taking up that much space and time.
No, it's totally fine. And thank you for jumping into this. It's very useful. Yeah, Penny?
I want to leave a moment after I've posed these questions and we've gotten answers in case anyone else in this live session currently has one. But I would pose 2 questions from participants who couldn't be with us today, but will be watching this later. They're so intertwined that I thought I would pose them both at once, and I will drop them into the chat box. The first is from Marzuku from France. As young people, how can we influence the negotiations during COP27 if we do not have access to the negotiation rooms? And the second is from Luke from the Netherlands, who asked, what are important principles of negotiations to be aware of or learn about before engaging in a negotiation?
Thank you for this, Penny. I don't know, do we have a volunteer? Speak here is yes, Lou.
Yeah, I don't pretend to have all of the answers, but just something that came up to my mind is without even entering a conference room, there's so much you can do. We like outside the UN spaces, for example, if there is like a big climate diplomacy event happening in your city or something, for example, you often Fridays for Future will organize a strike in front of it and make the voices of the youth heard within the UN spaces, but without entering a conference room. We did a lot of civil disobedience, singing our requests in front of the negotiation rooms, doing very visual protests with signs and with boards where people would write, young people would write their demands. Or we had one coming for Climate Action Network where all of the people representing people from small islands that are going underwater or people already affected by climate change, they would lie down in front of the negotiation room and someone would do a speech about loss and damage. And negotiators had to literally walk above people's bodies that were lying on the ground to get into the negotiation room. So it was something really visual that really attracted attention and made people kind of question what they wanted to negotiate it on. And when I got into the negotiation room after, even from within the negotiation room, you can hear the young people outside chanting their demands, and it puts a lot of pressure on negotiators, of course. So without even entering a negotiation room, there are a lot of ways you can protest for sure. I'll pass it on to my colleagues.
Thank you, Lou. Yeah, it's a very important question, actually, to find ways to how to influence, even though a lot of times we're not allowed to enter like the rooms where the climate discussions are being held. So are there any of the rest of the guest speakers that would like to share their experience or some ideas on that?
I think when it comes to negotiating, comes to influencing negotiations, the local action that all of us talked about earlier is that what also like really matters, right? You don't have to necessarily be inside the room. Well, I mean, of course, it's easier to be inside the room and then influence negotiations, but like that is not the only power that you have. Like the power that we have as like climate activists, the power that we have as civil society is really like to try and build public pressure in our homes in the end, because yes, you might not be in the room, but in the end, like the government that is going to be in that room is responsive to what people do at home in the country. So if you are active in an organization, and an environmental organization, or if you're active in like a different kind of movement, that is also where you can like make a change, and you can really try and push your government into a certain direction. Because I think policy making is often very slow, and often very bounded to public pressure. At least that's what I believe in. Like this is like how I see government. And if there is no push from the one side, the government is not going to budge in any kind of sense. So if you are pushing, be that in the negotiation room or be that at home, they will kind of like see this as a reason to focus more of their attention on an issue, because they see and they realize, oh, hey, listen, if we don't react to this, this is going to look bad in the press. This is going to have some kind of repercussions, maybe on like the next election and everything. And they want to be seen to be reacting, especially to like the voices of like young people. And that's like what I kind of like also blame the pandemic for. The fact that I think in 2019, like the global climate movement was really gaining some traction. And that steam just got lost from like the lockdowns, from everything else. And now people also kind of like burned out by the 2 last years of crises and the continuing crises and the constant state of crisis that we are. But that's still like all to say, you can influence it from like the local level. And even if you think, okay, listen, I can't really do it like at an organizational level, it is definitely fine if you start off in your family. It is definitely fine if you start in like your circle of friends, and then just like try to build up that kind of like engagement, try to build up that kind of movement. Because at the end of the day, we are not in this alone. We can't do this alone either. It wouldn't also be good for us to do any of this alone. And we need to rely on each other, and we need to help each other on this way to really like pushing for a world where we'd also wanna and like to live in.
No, that's very important. This is so true. So I see Elisa has opened her mic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Elisha just said. And I just wanted to add, maybe he just mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think for me, that pandemic was obviously like 99.9% terrible. And I think we all lived through that in different ways. But I think if there is one thing for me that is kind of hopeful, and one thing that we can learn from all of that, is that when governments want to, they can, because for me, it's really impressive how so quickly governments, let's say in Canada, like how in just a matter of days, of weeks, like the government was able to redirect like so much money and so much time to, and adopting their policies, adopting their interventions to really react to this emergency situation. So for me, it showed that when there is political will, things can happen and things can be done fast. And I think we just need to ensure that we have enough, that we are loud enough to make sure that they understand that this is an emergency situation, and that it is as important to act as fast as they did for the pandemic. So now we know that they can when they want to. So I think that we need to use that to our advantage.
Thank you, Elisa. I wanted to say that if there are any other questions, just because we are approaching slowly to the end of this discussion, or any questions from the audience, or any thoughts from the guest speakers that would like to address in these last minutes. Yeah, Elisa.
I just had a thought, because we were talking at the very beginning, right, about imposter syndrome and everything, and us being like young. And for me, what is just very important to know is that young doesn't mean inexperienced. Well, scrap that. Young doesn't necessarily mean unknowledgeable about like the different kind of issues. In the end, being young really just means that you have been on this earth for less time than someone that's older than you. And there is no way that you could catch up to them. Like there's literally no way. But again, that does not mean that you can have more experience, like more in something than someone else that is older than you. It doesn't mean that you can't have more knowledge in something than someone that's older than you. And it doesn't mean that that person knows what it feels like growing up today better than you do, because you are the one that is growing up today and now, and you are the one that is like really pushing for this kind of change, who really sees, okay, the climate crisis, is that what is driving my activism? The climate crisis, is that what I want to act upon? And like the climate crisis, is that what I want to prevent with all the action that I'm taking with my friends, with my family, with the bigger kind of climate movement in which you are?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that, to be honest, because it's a very strong opinion of the young generation, the climate crisis that we're experiencing now, and this shouldn't stop us from, expressing and being activists, because sometimes we always think, oh, okay, I'm young, I don't have experience, I don't know how to do it, but there are so many resources and so many people that you can contact and search and be involved. So I couldn't agree more with that. And yeah, I'm gonna pass the floor to Penny if there aren't any questions or thoughts, just to close our discussion.
Fantastic. So I would love to express my warm gratitude to Elisha, Alyssa, Lou, and Jan for speaking with us on this Saturday afternoon, as well as to Pega, my co-organizer for the Masterclass series, and Agnes for moderating today. This was such an interesting and engaging discussion that I cannot wait to watch back later. We've gotten a few emails about recordings, so I would clarify here that we'll upload the live session to our respective YouTube channels later today. The link will be shared with all who registered and the participants who couldn't be here live via email. We'll also send the toolkit developed last weekend at our masterclass training with you within a week in a separate email full of resources, contact points, and just generally points developed at our masterclass training last weekend. So once more, I want to express my gratitude to GCE and YEE for making this event possible, and to all our speakers and participants. And before we leave completely for today, I want to ask each of our speakers to send us what is your short final message that you want to leave for young climate negotiators watching.
Maybe I can start it off. I would just say, believe in yourself, because we need you, the world needs you. And I'm super excited to see what you guys are all going to be able to do at COP, if you are attending COP, if not, in your own local communities, in your own countries. We need everyone, no matter where you will be in the world.
Yeah, I guess I can take over. I believe collective action is much more powerful than individual action. And we often forget that our power is not just as consumer with how we spend our money, but as a young person, we are citizens with a voice, rights, and responsibilities. So narrow down what you're interested in, join an NGO, local, national, or international, doesn't matter. And yeah, climate diplomacy can feel very daunting, but it can be just going to your town meeting or be bold and attend COP, And I like this quote, everything you want is on the other side of fear. I really believe this. So believe in yourself and just speak up.
Honestly, I really don't know how I can follow all of this up, but I can try. I think all of this and all of what you heard today is really about trying to empower you and making you also believe in yourself, because you wouldn't be in those places if you really didn't already prove yourself to a certain extent, right? You might already be in those places, be talking about the kind of things, but are a bit fearful because it is daunting to speak up in all of those kind of things. But in the end, you are ready to do these things. You are there because of all of what you did. You are there because of everything that you experienced and all the other actions that you do. And for me as well, during the summer months, I was just down, laying out flat because the European Union decided to call investment into gas and nuclear energy as sustainable. And I kind of deflated all of my activism, because I'm there was such a big push towards that the European Parliament at least is going to say no, we don't agree with this. And activism just comes in waves. And if you feel deflated at some other moment, talk to your friends about around you about it, and try to really keep that kind of flame going on, because it's that collective action that Lou and Elisa have also been talking about, that we need to get things done, that we need to change the world, and that we need to just also imagine and act that world in which we all think is just going to be a better place.
So with that, I believe we have our final thoughts. So I would like to thank everyone for being here once again and for participating and engaging so lively with our speakers. Have a fantastic afternoon.
Thank you everyone for joining, and special thanks to our speakers and to you.